Love it or hate it, artificial intelligence is pretty much everywhere, specifically within the smartphone industry. And today we're looking at the Honor 400, not to be confused with the 400 Lite or the 400 Pro. This phone comes in at £400 in the UK, at least at the time of filming, and that will give you 8GB of RAM and 256GB of internal storage. Double the storage capacity to 512GB, and it can be found for £450. Now, the manufacturer has pretty much cooked this device with a lot of AI features. And in this review, you can see if they actually operate as they should, and of course, if the phone is actually worth its price tag. So to kick things off, I would just like to point out that within the box, you've got the smartphone with a pre-applied screen protector, a SIM ejector tool, and a USB Type-C to Type-C cable. It is a shame, however, that the manufacturer has not included a case, which you'd find on some rival alternatives. I mention this because the phone's design itself is quite stylish and does actually feel pretty premium. However, due to the camera bump, it means that if you're going to be laying it flat on a surface, such as let's say a table, it will be constantly rocking about. So therefore, it is an accessory that you might want to consider looking at getting. Now, nonetheless, the phone itself weighs in at just 184 grams and therefore makes it very easy for one-handed operation. I also like the fact that you have got the volume rocker and the power button on the right hand side, making it very easy to initiate, and it does actually feel pretty clicky as well. There's also a USB Type-C port towards the bottom, which sits alongside a SIM tray. Here you'll find dual nano SIM capabilities, although you can replace one of the physical SIMs with an eSIM, making it handy in certain scenarios. Apart from that, you have also got NFC, which can be handy for contactless payments, and you've got some pretty punchy and loud stereo speakers. Yes, indeed, in comparison to some of the alternatives out there in the market, namely some of those that come in at a slightly cheaper price point, which emit a dual speaker configuration, this phone will give you a little bit of extra immersion, be it if you're going to be consuming media, listening to music, or of course, for example, gaming. Elsewhere, I would like to point out that the phone is available in 3 different color finishes: Desert Gold, Meteor Silver, and the pictured Midnight Black. It also has got IP65 rating, therefore giving you some peace of mind for some dust and water resistance. Now, aside from its aesthetics, you have got an under fingerprint optical sensor. I actually found it to be not the fastest, specifically given Honor's pedigree in this department, but it still does provide you a pretty good means of accessing your smartphone in comparison to, for example, using a PIN or password. You can also pair this up with Face Unlock, although just bear in mind over here it's not using 3D biometric data, so it's not going to be as secure as using your fingerprint or of course traditional methods of unlocking your smartphone. Now, this does actually bring me on to its 6.55-inch 120Hz AMOLED display, which has got a resolution of 1264 by 2736. There's HDR support as well. Here, I've recorded a peak brightness of 617 nits and a minimum of 1.54 nits. In other words, over here in bright sunlit conditions, it will actually get pretty bright for you to actually look at the screen, although it isn't as bright as some of its key competitors, which will get to roughly 700 to 800 nits. However, its minimum brightness is certainly appreciated because it does get very dim. Therefore, meaning that if you're going to be using it in a nighttime scenario, you won't have any sort of problems with your eyes. Furthermore, it's reinforced by the fact that you have got 3840Hz PWM dimming, therefore giving you less eye strain, and combining this with the low blue modes that you'll find on a lot of phones, such as this one, it means that you can really use this on those nighttime scenarios. So next up, we get on to one of the key selling points of this smartphone, and that is with its rear camera configuration. Because here you've got a 200 megapixel f1.9 wide lens with OIS and a 12 megapixel f2.2 ultra wide. Now, the latter is very useful in certain scenarios, although if you do compare and contrast it with the main lens or even some of its competitors, which will offer you north of 50 megapixel with their ultra wide lenses, it won't quite compete. Nonetheless, over here, when it comes to its main lens, which I suspect a lot of people will be actually utilizing, it does actually do a phenomenal job, be it with or without AI. On that note over here, there is something called AI Super Zoom that will kick in at 30 times digital zoom. Of course, you can disable the feature if you so wish. And yes, the phone has got zoom levels up to 30 times, therefore allowing you to really get into a subject. Just bear in mind over here that you will suffer from some noise, be it in normal or low light conditions. Here you have also got something called Super Macro, which effectively utilizes the main lens in order to get a little bit of a macro shot. it does actually do a pretty good job, although I suspect most people won't be shoving their phone right close to a subject, in other words 1 or 2 centimeters away, in order to get that macro shot, but rather will be just utilizing the main lens in the 1x zoom. Now, in terms of the overall low light performance, the phone actually does fare very well. Yet again, that is also due to the main camera lens operating on f1.9. It draws in a good amount of light within the sensor and therefore means that the overall image quality does actually look pretty good. Yet again, if you're going to be zooming in, you'll be able to notice quite a bit of image noise, but in a grander scheme of things, I think a lot of people will be impressed, specifically given the overall price point that Honor is actually asking for. Now, where it really stands out more than anything is with the integration of the AI tools. For example, AI arrays, which is something that a lot of people have come across with a lot of other smartphones out there, but it does actually do a very good job of giving you a good AI arrays feature. Then you've got something called Facetune, AI Beauty, AI Upscale, AI Cutout, and also the AI Outpainting, which in my opinion is absolutely mind-boggling. It pretty much expands the scene and gives you an AI reproduced image. This actually does a really good job, and sure enough, there are certain anomalies in certain instances, but again over here, I think a lot of people will be impressed as to what it's actually capable of. Now, what's even more jaw-dropping more than anything is the image to video feature. This is actually using Google Cloud AI, also known as Veo 2, and it does some absolutely bonkers stuff. Something I've never come across on a smartphone before, and it's ridiculous how Honor have actually cooked this phone. Yes, indeed, over here you can effectively transform a still image into video, and the results speak for themselves. Here you'll be able to see a variety of different images that I did and their comparison of what the video was generated. Just bear in mind, all of this is AI generated, and yet it does an absolutely incredible job. Sure, there are instances where it does look a little bit fake. For example, when I was with my wife, it did feel a little bit odd when it came to what it was doing with our faces, but still over here, you just have to consider the power of the AI tool that is at your hands. Indeed, over here, by just simply taking an image, you can create some ridiculous videos. And I just think this is really crazy to say the least. Especially given the overall price point of the phone, it means that AI is being integrated in a lot more devices and a lot more affordable devices as well. Therefore, meaning that AI will be at the hands of a lot more individuals. Now, be it if you love it or hate it, I still do think this is an incredible leap in technology. It really has come feet and bounds ahead in recent times, and in just the last year, it's crazy to see what smartphone manufacturers have been able to do, such as with the likes of Honor. Now, it is worth mentioning over here that I did notice that it did say that this video feature, in other words, the image to video feature, is actually on a limited time offer and on a trial. So I suspect at a later date, the manufacturer will start charging, although I've got no indication of the overall pricing and or when that might come about. This is something similar that Samsung did, and therefore it's just something worth bearing in mind. Nonetheless, at the time of filming, it seems that it's completely free. As long as you've got an internet connection, then you can do all those AI shenanigans. Now, past all of this, we should also talk about its selfie camera, because here you've got a 50 megapixel f2.0 wide lens, and it actually does do a really good job. Namely, in comparison to some of its competitors, it draws in a good amount of light in low light conditions, also gives you good amount of detail due to its 50 megapixel count, and does a great job when it comes to the portrait effect. Yet again, no sort of complaints whatsoever. And again, if you do pair this up with the use of those AI shenanigans, you can really go crazy with it, be it in terms of creating video or adding a beauty effect or even reducing certain glare. Frankly, over here, when it comes to its camera configuration, when it comes to still photography, I've got no complaints whatsoever. Now, the same sort of praise can be said about its recording capabilities, because here you can shoot at 4K 30 FPS, 1080p and 720p at 60 and 30 FPS, and you can also use the slow-mo mode, which will allow you to shoot 1080p at 120 FPS and 720p at 240 FPS. Now, from my test, I was actually left pretty impressed by the overall video capabilities. And you can actually zoom up to 10 times, and you've also got 0.7 times, in other words, utilizing the ultra-wide lens at 4K, although this is not supported at 1080p or 720p, so just some food for thought. Here it is also fantastic to see that the video resolution and frame rates are also at the front selfie camera. So yes, you're not actually capped at 1080p 30 FPS like you'd find on some rival alternatives, allowing you to take some better quality front-facing videos as well. Now, despite all of its competencies, specifically when it comes to its video capabilities, there was something that I really noticed as a bug. See, while recording at 4K 30 FPS and zooming in up to 10 times, it would tragically lag so badly. It was actually ridiculous to say the least. Now, I've reported this bug to Honor and provided this video sample in order for them to decipher it. Now, this does actually bring me on to performance. And here you've got a Qualcomm Snapdragon 7 Gen 3 chipset. You've got 8GB of RAM, although it's also paired up with 8GB of the Honor RAM Turbo, which is effectively using your internal storage to boost up that RAM capability. You've also got an octa-core processor and an Adreno 720 GPU. In Geekbench 6, I noted a single-core score of 1,145 and a multi-core score of 3,132. It is pretty much mid-tier performance as you might expect, and it does actually fare pretty well. In terms of using the phone on a day-to-day basis, for example, when it came to multitasking, I didn't encounter much lag. It also was pretty snappy when it came to opening certain apps, and while gaming, I didn't encounter any stuttering issues either. Frankly, for the vast majority of consumers, I think you'll be left pretty impressed. But of course, if you're a hardcore gamer playing pretty graphically intense games, then you might want to look at some of the other smartphones, be it at its price point or indeed a little bit above, in order to get some more flagship tier performance. Now, on that note, it brings me on to software, and here out the box, at least at the time of filming, it's shipped with Android 15, with Magic OS 9. You're also promised 6 major updates with security patches as well, showing good sort of support from the manufacturer and giving it good sort of longevity. Now, the software itself is very comprehensive, provides you plenty of customization and personalization options. And while some people would prefer a bit more of a stock Android approach, I really do like the blend that Honor has brought over the years. And here, of course, you have got plenty of AI tools, should you wish to use them or not. In this respect, I do feel that it might be a little bit overwhelming for certain individuals, but again, over here, you don't have to utilize them, or indeed, you can simply ignore them if you so wish. Next up, we get onto battery life, and here, housed within the EU version, you've got a 5,300 mAh battery pack. Although in some of the other territories, such as like in China, you'll find a larger 6,000 mAh battery instead. Now, in the EU version, I noticed a battery rundown time of 25 hours and 24 minutes. And as you'll be able to see from the graph, it's pretty much mid-tier. In other words, this will last you roughly 1.5 to 2 days of usage, if you are a light to medium user, of course. If, however, you're a heavy gamer, then expect sub 1 day. Now, thankfully, you have got 66 watts of wired charging capabilities, meaning that with a quick blast of 15 minutes of charge, you can get up to 44%, which is seriously impressive. You've also got 5 watts of wired reverse charging capabilities, which can be quite handy in certain scenarios. And in case you're wondering, no, you do not have any wireless charging capabilities, which might come as a disappointment to certain individuals. So with all that in mind, it brings me on to my verdict of the Honor 400. And yes, indeed, there are a lot of AI features that are baked into this smartphone. But of course, if you do not like the AI shenanigans, you can just disable them altogether. And even without all of the AI features, which in my opinion are one of the key selling points of this smartphone over some of the rival alternatives, I still think this is an absolutely tremendous smartphone, especially given the overall price point that Honor is asking for. Because here you've got some really nice aesthetics and build quality, a fantastic front and rear camera configuration, be it for still or video capabilities, a fluid 120Hz AMOLED display, which is also very vivid, and you've also got decent battery life and chipset performance. Now, given all of this, I can certainly see myself recommending it, and as such, it gets my Best Buy award. Now, sure enough, it's not quite perfect across all the departments, so I'll be curious to know if you would pick it over some rival alternatives down in the comment section below. Now, if you have enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing, and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed, and I'll hopefully see you next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.